In 2013, I coined the name Grampian, and I gave it to your host, Jim Tracy.
Champion Nation, welcome back to another exciting, I think it's really exciting version of our podcast. We usually talk to people about really encouraging stuff, and this is no exception. However, our topic is going to be a little more serious. The question that came to me, and I'll tell you why it came to me in just a moment when I introduce our guest, but the question that came to me is, does DEI work in America? And the answer is, well, let's find out. Folks, join me in welcoming Ryan Ruffaner, who is an industrial organizational psychologist, who's one of the young, brilliant minds in America, who has championed championed the American workforce in many ways, simply because you wanted to work really well. And as an industrial organizational psychologist, you are one of the leading voices in the U.S. So, man, we are thrilled to have you on the Grampian podcast. Welcome, Ryan. How in the heck are you, man?
I'm good. How are you, Jim?
Very well, and thanks for joining us here. So, just by way of introduction, I one of the things that kind of started this up is I'm a pilot. Everybody knows I'm a pilot. You know, you can tell somebody's a pilot, just wait 2 minutes, they'll tell you, right? And so, but I saw a notice from the FAA, and it said that they made this decision to hire employees that were targeted, and one of the disabilities that they wanted to hire employees in was a psychiatric disability, a severe psychiatric disability. And I thought, wow, that's probably not the guy we want inspecting airplanes. That's probably not the gal we want at air traffic control. I don't know what jobs they are, but flying's pretty serious business. And I want people who have really strong skill sets. I mean, who do you want flying your plane, man? You want a good pilot, or you want someone who is like looks right, acts right, does or wrong? I mean, so that really took me on a path, and in that path, I met this dude, and so if you get the top 20 rooms, this is the smartest guy in the room, and he is a student of first ESG, environmental, social, and governance, and then DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ryan, what got you interested in this? What brought you down this path, man?
Well, it's a long and winding road. The short of it is I started realizing that if I avoided DEI was still going to be there. Okay, DEI was not going to ignore me. I am a white guy, obviously. So when I looked at all these DEI initiatives that were discriminating against white people, against men, against straight people, in some cases against Christians, able-bodied people, you name it, just about every single so-called majority category that there is, I was like, either I can ignore this at my own peril, or I can get involved and lead the conversation. Because my research has shown that even though there is no solid theoretical or realistic support for DEI whatsoever, many people are buying into it like crazy. And it is hurting people. It is hurting companies. It's got to end.
Wow. So you're obviously very passionate about this. And I think one of the things that we can do is introduce DEI in this fashion. Number one, it's 3 words. And these 3 words are actually good words. I mean, if I look at diversity, is diversity good? Well, you look around and you're like, well, you want a diverse portfolio? Well, of course you do. You want a balanced portfolio. You want it to get great returns. But is diversity good in a DEI context? What does diversity mean when you're talking about its implications in DEI?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to start by differentiating between 2 types of diversity, one of which is going to be very common to you and your listeners. The other, virtually nobody, including in the DEI field, has ever heard of. Okay. The first one is called surface level diversity. This is diversity of age, race, and gender. Most DEI doesn't care about age at all. Okay. They care mostly about gender and race/ethnicity. The other kind of diversity that virtually nobody talks about is called deep level diversity. This is the kind of diversity that Martin Luther King was talking about when he said he wanted his children to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Oh,
This
right on.
is the differences in our values, our opinions, our attitudes, beliefs, personality traits, everything that really defines who we are as individuals. And in the case of the workplace, defines our individual knowledge, skills, abilities, and other things as they relate to the success of our organization.
Like talent and merit and
Talent, yes, exactly.
things that are empirically measurable.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So diversity in a DEI context is not really the diversity that our fathers or our grandfathers or even especially my age that I understood. Okay, so let's dive off that word salad and say now equity. So equity, in my mind, I think of equitable. I think of my son Ryan, my partner, my business partner, has got from a young point. He's got what we call the Ryan fairness doctrine. So if it's fair, you can recognize it's fair, and if you recognize it's fair, then it's probably an appropriate thing to do. However, if Ryan doesn't think it's fair, it's automatically not fair. And so when you're 8, I mean, fair has a moving target.
Yeah. Anything you don't like is unfair. Anything you do like is fair.
Exactly.
Kind of
the law is fair. I mean, the law, when it's perfectly executed, is fair. I mean, 55 miles an hour is the speed limit. It's not 54 sometimes. It's not 56 sometimes. It's always this non-moving, posted, measurable, attainable, I'm going to say good thing. I mean, some people think we ought not to have speed limits. I think they're good, but it's like you can count on it. Equity is something that is the same for everyone.
Well, okay.
In a DEI context, are we using the same word? I mean, equity is good. I'm not doubting that. I want equity, but does the DEI equity match the equity of our life experience?
No. So let's dive a little deeper into this concept of equity. What it's supposed to mean, what it actually means to people in the DEI field, and why they think of it like this in this flawed sense. So equity, to most people, if you don't think of it in the DEI sense, is about equality of opportunity, which everybody should have. And the equality of opportunity has to do with equality of opportunity to show your merit for a position or in a company. I think that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
What equity in DEI means is forcing outcomes based on their flawed notion of diversity. So forcing outcomes based on race and gender, for example.
Okay.
So nothing to do with merit, or at least if there are other meritocratic criteria they're looking at, race and gender still are a criteria in there. And I say that because this is one of the ways that DEI people will often defend themselves. They'll say, well, we're not just looking at race or gender. And I say, yes, but it's a criteria that has nothing to do with competence.
Okay. All right. So then we look at the third word, inclusion. And so I'm going to take you to a kid's birthday party. And they're having this lovely party, and this one little kid is excluded. I don't know, because he's got boogers running down his nose, because he's just the weirdo of the group. I mean, I was that kid, and so we want our children to be inclusive. We don't want them to exclude someone just because they don't like them or they're not the cool kid or whatever. So inclusion, by its very nature and training, is a good thing. We want to be inclusive of everybody for virtually any reason, except there's some logic path here. Like I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go hang out with someone and spend a whole bunch of time and invest a whole bunch of my energy in a person who we have nothing in common with and I don't like. I'm just not going to do it. It's like it ain't me. So in that case, I'm not being inclusive. However, if I do it for a reason that's bad, if I have a person who comes up here and there's and I'm using physical characteristics to exclude them, well, number one, as a businessman, I'm an idiot. Number two, as a human, I'm not very nice. So inclusion is good. I
Hmm.
love inclusion and I want inclusion. What does DEI, what have they done with this inclusion to make it not what I think it is?
The important thing to remember about DEI is DEI, for various reasons, including the ideology that undergirds it, plays a lot of language games. So oftentimes they will use words to mean their opposite or to obfuscate what they're actually doing. So in this case, inclusion isn't about including everybody. It's about including some people and excluding others. And based on their scheme of things, it means forcing the inclusion of people based on that surface level diversity, like race and gender, and excluding other people based on their majority group status, like being white, being male, and so on and so forth. I'll give you a
Okay.
concrete example of this. There are something that is euphemistically called employee resource groups. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, what this sounds like is that a company is simply giving employees resources to succeed in the workplace. That's not what it is. What these employee resource groups actually do is segregate employees based on race, gender, sexuality, and so on and so forth, and then give those groups of people, whom they've excluded the majority groups from, special access to networking opportunities, training opportunities, leadership, development, all these kinds of things. So
Like picking
inclusion,
winners and losers.
yes, picking winners and losers.
Okay.
But then when you call them out on this and you say, well, hold on a minute, how come there are no white people allowed in the black employee resource group? Or even, why are there no Hispanic people allowed in the black employee resource group? After all, if you're simply trying to help minorities, why segregate the minorities from each other? And this is because inclusion to them actually means exclusion and segregation.
Oh my goodness. I heard this and when I first heard it, I thought, well, that can't be so. These 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 folks, they want to do the right thing and it
Mm.
might be well-meaning and it might be well-intentioned, but they're actually doing the wrong thing. And to bring that to a point, I spoke with a man who was a minority, and I was talking because this came up, and I'm like, let's talk about DEI, and he's like, why do you want to talk about that? I'm like, because
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by it. And as I grow more fascinated with it and I look at it at a deeper level, I want to know about diversity and equity and inclusion. He goes, that's not what they mean. And
Mm.
now this is a minority man. And I said, so what does it mean? He says, well, D stands for division because they divide us.
Mhm.
And E stands for enragement because the people who I get ahead of are angry because I didn't deserve it. I'm like,
Mm.
oh, okay. And I said, so what's the I? He said, that's infection because what they've done is changed my workplace so we are infected with hate and we can't get along because it's not allowed anymore. So diversity, equity, inclusion becomes division, enragement, and infection. And I thought, this is coming from a guy who this is supposed to help.
Mhm.
And that has created some passion in me, but I see the same passion in you. What
Mm.
drives it? What drives your passion? I mean, about, I guess, correcting DEI or exposing DEI? You're hitting the national speaking circuit, man. You're like a rock star.
Yeah, thank you. So for me personally, it started as disbelief. This, I was looking at it and I was like, well, these people can't actually believe this. Or, okay, some people do, but it's mostly confined to the college campus. Very wrong on that account. Or it's, okay, it's everywhere, but it's not going to last.
Yeah.
Sure, some people believe this, but there's no way it's going to infect this part of our society or that part of our society. But the more I looked at it, the more I saw that people, even in my industry, were buying into this or making excuses for it. Then I saw it in like the United States Department of Defense. I was like, okay, if it's in our military, in one of
DOD,
the
man.
more, it's gone too far. and it's not going to burn out on its own. Something has to be done. Add to that the fact that you've got millions and millions of white people, men, straight people, so on and so forth, who are being actively discriminated against and then being told that they should feel proud of that discrimination and aid and abet that discrimination. And that added to my anger and frustration. And then I'd even add on top of that the not so subtle condescending nature of DEI initiatives to minorities, saying you cannot succeed without us. You can't succeed based on your own merits, on your own intelligence, on your own work ethic. You need us to succeed. This sort of abusive spouse mentality of you're nothing without me. And I said, okay, this needs to end. I have so much anger towards DEI, but I also have compassion towards those that are being negatively affected, and compassion towards organizations that are being destroyed by this nonsense. And I know you have some experience. You actually lived through the rise and spread of DEI in a way that I didn't. So I'm curious to know what that was like for you personally, because I wasn't aware of it. And when I was aware of it, it was too late.
Yeah. And I think many times as I look back over, it's something that most of the bad ideas, they kind of creep in and then they get quashed quickly because they're on their own merits. They're bad ideas.
Yeah.
and so that wasn't the case here, because if you look at the roots of DEI, I mean, you and I have chatted about this before, but it's got its roots in something called ESG, which is we're going to dive into that. This is starting to look like a 2 podcast at least thing, because people need to understand when you mandate. And so when I look at, again, DEI, when you mandate the D, so when you mandate diversity, what you're saying is that we're going to take control of quantifiable metrics, think of them as body counts, and we're going to mandate that regardless of qualification, we're going to make you diverse. And I mean, like, I can see where well-meaning people would think this is really fair, this is cool, this is awesome, because everybody gets an even shot. But no, nobody gets an even shot. The people who make the decisions and who are pulling the the long straws out are clipping them before somebody gets a short straw. So that, number one. So it's forced diversity, and then it's forced equity. What I think is equitable, and what my worldview says equitable, is not right. Oh, well, why isn't it right? Because we are going to force our new version of equity on you. And then, in order to fully complete the cycle, we're going to force you to be inclusive of whatever we say. Well, now wait a minute. So you're talking about forced equity, forced diversity, forced equity, and forced inclusion. What you're talking about is something that does not resemble any form of meritocracy, which was the free market that the United States and other great countries were built upon. And as I look at the world, with a worldview that goes past North America, it looks like the countries that are now doing well have flushed this idea, and the countries that are not doing so well, ours included, have embraced it, whether it be in business, in the military, small business are forcing it. I mean, the government, specifically the UN, forced it on the US. The US forced it on businesses, and large businesses embraced it, and then they forced it on small businesses, and now small businesses are awash in regulation and things that they certainly don't understand, but I mean, they don't have access to. So it has been an epic failure. And I guess that the question that I have for anyone, but specifically, especially for you, because you're a student of this stuff, is has it ever worked? Is there any empirical data that shows that DEI has been effective? I mean, let's examine it on its own merits. What has it done right? Ryan, What
Yeah.
has DEA done that has worked in American business and culture to make it better?
The shorter answer is nothing. The longer answer is probably going to lead to a second podcast because so I won't get too deep into the weeds. I will say that DEI is one of the few things in business that is either not measured or measured unethically and irrationally. I'll dive a little deeper into that. Everything in a company needs to be measured. We need to have metrics for these things. Okay. Does
Bingo.
training actually work? How successful is your merger and acquisition, and how do you know? Um, how strong is your talent pipeline? All these things have metrics.
You
But the
know, it
cash,
really starts though with, I
mhm,
mean, and I'm a numbers guy.
mhm,
I like show me the numbers. That's what
yeah,
prove it. The numbers never lie. One of my mentors like the numbers never lie, and if they do, we're all screwed. So,
yeah, yeah,
but numbers to me represent, I mean, things like revenue,
mhm,
measurable, things like return, IROR, things
mhm,
like EBITDA. These are things that we can stack one on top of another. And when you use the same math, you always get the same answer.
mhm.
What I'm hearing is that there are no measurable, discernible, quantifiable, predictable metrics that are used to measure DEI. Is that accurate?
It's mostly accurate. So
Okay.
here's what I mean by that. DEI doesn't give a crap about deep level diversity variables. So they will hire, let's say, a black woman into a position of leadership, and let's say she does really well. Maybe the reason why she did well, and this is usually the case from my research, is because she's intelligent, she's conscientious, she sets up a culture of psychological safety, mutual support, good communication, responsibility. All these things that are about the content of her character and her behaviors. However, DEI will then look at that and simply say she is successful and she has made the company successful because she's black and because she's a woman. Therefore, we need to hire more black women in general and more black women into positions of authority. So they ignore what actually matters and then hire based on race and gender. And I'll add one more thing here. When it comes to DEI initiatives, there is an almost inescapable catch 22. Either you measure race and gender, in which case you are then using that as a criteria and violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964, or you don't measure them, in which case you have no idea if your DEI initiatives are working or not. You can't really escape that.
And that immediately goes back to what you said when we opened this up. Um, Dr. King said, I want
Mm,
my I want my measurement to be the content of their character, not the color of
mm,
their skin. So my gut feel is that he would be incredibly anti DEI
yes.
based
Yeah.
upon his own based upon his own convictions that it matters, you know, what you do, it matters who you are, not what you are.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And we are also,
Wow.
it's worth saying that we are primarily defined by our actions. So I like to say that nobody's tombstone has ever been engraved with their best intentions. And when it comes to the workplace, it's the same thing. All right? And to some extent, we do have to be a little bit exclusive because you know what? There are millions, literally millions of jobs out there, Jim, that I am not qualified for. Are they wrong for excluding me? Absolutely not. But they
Yeah.
should be excluding me based on my knowledge and skills or lack thereof, not the color of my skin
Yeah. Or your gender,
or
or
my
your
gender.
identity, or any
Yes.
of the things that that really don't affect performance.
Yes, absolutely.
So, um, so what I'm hearing, so we got to make sure we give everybody an equal shot because
Mhm.
we are equitable.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah.
have there been any notable successes? I mean, can we? I look at
Mhm.
one. I watched a hearing, and one of the people in Washington D.C. they were quizzing a businessman, an allegedly successful investor, and they said, "Hey, you've embraced this DEI, and you've measured it, and now." what have you shown? He says, well, we've really shown that it's awesome. And he's like, guy's like, well, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, because it's awesome. And then the senator, I think it was Josh Hawley, pointed out that actually, on a tangible level, the hire that you made that was forced down everybody's throat is yielding, and your company now is yielding 2 points less than the federal employees pension fund, which had not yet embraced DEI.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
Yeah.
professional investors are now getting 2 points less of a yield than the government. The government can't do anything right. Well, they
Yeah.
can fight wars and kill people, but I mean, above and beyond that,
Yeah.
they're really good at that. And here's a salute to our soldiers. We love you guys, and we love you gals, and keep protecting our freedom. But so, are there any notable success case studies? Is there anything that DEI can point to and say, "Hey, look at me! Look what we did! This is what we accomplished."
The shorter answer is no. The long answer is they will ignore other variables. Like, again, they will ignore personality traits. So, for example, if you're looking to hire somebody, the personality trait of conscientiousness is great. Okay. It has a lot of correlation with performance because it has to do with how organized you are, how hard you work, that sort of thing. So if they say, look how successful our DEI program is, well, maybe it's not because you hired more people who happen to have a lot of melanin in their skin. Maybe it's because you happen to hire people with melanin in their skin who are also intelligent and hardworking. So it wasn't because of your DEI initiative. It was because of the content of those people's character and the quality of their knowledge and skills. Another thing that DEI will often do is they'll point to shareholder value. Well, maybe the reason shareholder value has increased or their investments have increased because of DEI is because you have ESG investors investing in those DEI-ridden corporations. And so without those extra special biased investments, they wouldn't actually have a higher return on their stocks portfolio.
Wow, that's crazy. That is crazy. So, when you paste the three letters together, and we're going to
Yes.
set we're going to do a separate podcast that says, hey, here's the origins and here's ESG, blah 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 blah. Because this, I think we need to expose this. However, so when you paste D, E, and I together in the context of diversity, equity, inclusion as a programmatic action for American business, American government, um, what is what is it what does it stand for? What is their intent? I mean, these are not, I mean, I'm not going to paint people as evil people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people roll out of bed this morning and said, yeah, I think I'm just going to do a terrible job and ruin somebody's life. That
Yeah.
I don't think there's many. I'm sure there's some, but I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's many. But well-meaning, well-intentioned people want to socially engineer the workplace like they've done with the college campuses.
Yes.
I mean, why? There's got to be a why some here. I can't understand why, but I want to know why.
Okay. Yeah. So, first of all, I like what you said about socially engineering it. That is a very good way to put it. The basic reason why people buy into DEI is because they have been led to a misunderstanding of how the world works. So they believe that any form of unequal outcome, or as they sometimes call it, disparities or inequities, must be a result of unequal opportunity, which comes from systemic discrimination. Therefore, the only way to solve that problem is with large scale systemic change that engages in reverse discrimination. So they view reverse discrimination as a form of social justice to right, honestly, a misconceived notion of what is wrong with the world.
Where did this emanate from? Where did it begin? I mean, I know it began at the UN, and we're going to talk about
Mm,
that probably next week because we're going to run out of time. But
mm,
where did it begin in the U.S.? Was it in the government? Was it a college campus? Was it businesses? Was it investment brokerage
mm.
houses? Where did it? I mean, I know that I know that investment and brokerage houses were forced.
Mhm.
by other powers to do that. But where else? Where did it get its steam?
As far as I understand it, it basically came from our college campuses because it was exported from French, I hesitate to use the word intellectuals, but French intellectuals like Jacques Derrida, like Michel Foucault, and people like that,
Oh
Antonio
wow!
Gramsci, postmodernists, Marxists, and people of that nature, who then exported these ideas to the American universities. And these people in the American universities, for various reasons, believed that things like capitalism had failed, meritocracy had failed, liberal values, I don't mean politically liberal, I mean like liberal democracy values had failed, and therefore we needed an alternative. And these pseudo intellectual ideas took root, spread in our universities, and then the people in those universities graduated and went into the corporate environment, the legal environment, the government.
Wow. So that is going to be where we're going to pick up next week, because when you paste it all together, DEI in much, um, in a strong fashion,
Hmm.
looks a lot like socialism.
Yes.
And it looks a lot like the Marxist tendencies that were proffered by the UN. And we're gonna let's talk about that next week. Will you come back and join
Okay.
me again next week?
Yes.
All
Thank you,
right.
Jim.
So in part, I'd like you to think about how, and we'll talk about this again next week. But how
Mhm.
can we, as individuals, as companies, as voters, how can we take a stand against this? Because it is rather insidious in its effect on our people. Because
Mhm.
I think the biggest problem for me, what drives my passion, it is demoralizing to the folks that I spent 30 years coaching and teaching how to choose the right thing and how to choose the right staff to put around you and how to make sure that you got the best return for with the safest activity. So we need to be able to take a stand against government and schools, but more importantly, in my world, HR and legal departments and things like that, because we have to be the standard bearer. And I think you and I are going to have to take this up as a cause so that we can educate people and make them a Grampian. So thank you for coming on the Grampian, and we'll see you next week. And folks, Grampian Nation, I know this is a hard topic, and I know that it makes some people uncomfortable, but no one is saying diversity, equity, inclusion are bad. We're saying they're good. We're just saying someone changed them and they changed them for the worse. And we want you to be fully informed, and we want you to know that there's always someone who's out there who's speaking truth and on your side. Hey, we'll talk to you next week. This is Jim, and I am out. When you get an opportunity, subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast.